Paris study. It's a pleasure and an honor to introduce our guest this evening, Mr. Phelan, excuse me. He is formerly from England, and his topic this evening will be the New World. Mr. Phelan has a very educational background, and together with his business occupations for the past 25 years, he has been engaged in the pursuit of knowledge and experience in the area of metaphysical, spiritual, and paranormal. Mr. Phelan is joining us to become better acquainted with parastudy people and activities, and to give us an opportunity to meet him. And may I introduce Chris Phelan.
Thank you very much. Don't be too scared when you see the quantity of notes I've got. I may not use them all. On the other hand, I may use more. But let me first and foremost say that this is my first time in a gathering of this combination of people that I've spoken with in the United States. I've spoken to many different groups, political groups and so forth. People are out to make a buck. I'm not necessarily saying it was the same group. You can choose for yourself whether it was or not. But I want to say that as well as it being an honor for possibly you people to have me here, I am even more honored to be here, and I'm more honored for one particular reason, that in the past year I have done very little thinking. And when my very good friend, and I do say very good friend, Bill Booker, suggested to me that I might like to meet some of you people, and then came forward another step, maybe he tricked me, I don't know, said maybe you'd like to talk to these people, I realized that I had been informed, not just by Bill Booker, that I had been informed it was about time I did some more thinking. And hence what you're going to hear tonight are primarily not just the thoughts of what I've been thinking since talking to Bill Booker, but the thoughts that have passed through my mind and the things that I have thought about in the last 25 years. Now, I would like to introduce these words of mine with a quotation. The issue is now clear. It is between light and darkness, and everyone must choose his side. These were words spoken by G.K. Chesterton on his deathbed, and I believe my presence here this evening fits in very well with this particular connotation. I believe my presence here this evening to be fortunate for me, and I trust that this visit may well prove of benefit to us all. Let me say at the outset, and I cannot emphasize this too strongly, that my words this evening attempt only to introduce to you the person you see standing before you. I'm sure that most, if not all, of what I say, and what I will say in the course of this talk, will not be new to you. It is data and knowledge that is available to each and every one of us in this room, and to all those who are interested and have the desire to seek and to learn. I'm hoping that the contact and communication that will take place between us this evening will enhance my awareness and my betterment. And this may sound a very selfish thing to say, but I think there's one thing we have all got to be, more than anything else, we have got to be honest with ourselves. If we cannot be honest with ourselves in seeking our salvation, we cannot be honest with others in helping them to seek theirs. If what I talk about serves in any way, whatever, to be of help to others, then my visit is more than well recompensed. I mean that most sincerely and most generally. Now, as you already know, the subject of my talk is the New World, a title which appealed to the leprechaun in me. I sometimes wonder if it is because of the elements of the said gentleman within my character that makes me endlessly seek the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Now, Mrs. Booker, in introducing to me, said that I came from England. That was the last place I was before coming to the United States, geographically speaking. But I was born and I was raised in Ireland. And much of my faults and much of my qualities are responsible to that area. But whatever I am, whether leprechaun or not, what I primarily think of myself as is a seeker after knowledge and truth. I would like now to turn to the knowledge that I have sought and to its appraisal, and also the extrapolations that are valid, at least to me. I will not attempt to trace the chronology of this learning or this thinking, because far be it from me, I don't think I could, looking back at this stage, and I don't think the chronology is that important. Realizations and recognitions come at the most unusual moments, and I don't think it's very important as to why they come at a particular moment. What is really important is that the recognitions are made and that we act upon them. Suffice it to say that that is what I know and that is what I believe. Now, in order that we may examine the present-day world in which we live, and we do live in a world, albeit many people would try not to, we must attempt, or make an honest attempt, to review the happenings of this world so that we may recognize the state that we have been brought to and the consequences that flow from them. Because it is the consequences that flow from the circumstances of our world that dictates to a very large extent what we are and what we can become. This word become is a very important one to me, and I'm sure it's a very important one to many people in this room. Now, the pages of history are a record of man's belief in the eventual release of a species from the tyranny of his own dark nature. The spark of hope has never completely faded. It may at times have grown dim, but never at any time has it completely faded. And this spark of hope is no accident. It is an essential characteristic of man himself, and a major delineator that separates him from the other animals of the animal kingdom. If this were not so, if there were no spark of hope, there would be no survival for man, and there would be no survival for his kingdom. You know, hope very often is thought of as very likely. I hope to go there tomorrow. I hope to this and I hope to that. People, you know, use the word hope and they never really think of what they're saying. It's just a phrase. It becomes a cliche. I hope to see you tomorrow. I hope you have a nice vacation. I hope you enjoyed the movie. I hope this and I hope that and I hope the other. And they don't really think really what they're saying at all. And this is rather unfortunate. Now, the image of hope is and has been the cornerstone in the structure of man's journey throughout the ages. We can say without fear or doubt that this journey has in actual fact been a journey in the seeking of self. Even the normal historian will stumble upon the fact from time to time that many of our great men have a second side to their life as well as the deeds that they do in terms of the world's material things. And that is that they will sometimes recognize that this man or this person has grown to stature in the course of their lifetime and in what they do. Now, periodically, the goal of man has been obscured and shrouded in darkness and despair, and frequently would appear to be abandoned altogether. This is particularly so in times of war, and it is also self-evident in times of personal stress. However, there would appear, or there is, a built-in mechanism that prevents, at least in the general sense, total fratricide. And I hope to show that it is precisely this mechanism to which I have referred that is the prime ethic, and also the activating agent in man himself. You know, a lot of us spend a lot of time seeking for the most mysterious factors about our existence. And sad to say, for most people who spend this form of time, it is right there, figuratively speaking, at the end of their nose. Now, what do I mean by this, what I've just said? That it is the activating agent, the prime ethic, the activating agent. These may be terms which they might at first seem to be inconsequential or non-consequential, but they are not. all man's actions, all of our actions, that is, even those which appear to run contrary to accepted codes of behavior, are activated by this ethic. Frequently, it is on a non-conscious level, but just as often, it is also a conscious driving force. Whenever it is conscious, now we come to the dividing line. Whenever it is conscious, it is always positive and always operates for good. It is only when it is non-conscious, in which, in other words, it is heavily impinged by other forces, that it activates for what we might refer to as bad in our society, or acts in a retrograde manner. Now, when action of any sort produces evil, this is really what I'm saying, when action of any sort produces evil, it is always the result of non-conscious forces impinging upon non-conscious thought. Always, without question, as far as my knowledge or my experience goes. And by the way, I would like to put in parentheses at this point that anything I say this evening is what I personally believe. It is not necessarily universally so. One of the great crimes of our society and of being human is our conceit in believing we know the answer to everything for everybody. Now, I also hope to show that the ethic referred to is both organic and transcendent. It is organic in the sense that it has within itself the potentiality of growth or decay, and furthermore, it is transcendent in that it can, by its own development, raise individual man to a higher level of awareness of himself and of the universality of which he is a part. And it is not 10,000 miles out in space or something else like that. It is something that is right here in this room with each and every one of us. No judgment, evaluation, or action can ever be made without recourse to this ethic at some stage or other. It is from this and through it alone that we, as members of the human family, participate in what is known universally as conscience. It is this and nothing else. It is, in point of fact, the realization of this ethic within ourselves, that it is within ourselves, that actually creates conscience itself. It is fed and sustained by the innate knowingness of the individual. The innate knowingness. Not something you've got to be taught by teachers, by parents, by society, by government, or anything else. It is an innate knowingness. By the way, let me say in parentheses here, just throw it out, it's a wild one I like to throw out from now and then, that if you didn't know something, when you read it, you wouldn't recognize it if you didn't know it already. When you went to school and learned mathematics, you wouldn't have even understood what you were learning if you didn't already know it. This is exactly what we're talking about. You know, how many times have you run into the case of where you find a small child who can come up and tell you, quote, the most startling information, and mother turns around and says, Johnny, you couldn't have known that. Nobody ever told Johnny. How could he know? She has taken great pains not to let him know to begin with. By the way, fathers do this just as well. It's not just the ladies that do it. One of the greatest tragedies and crimes we commit against children is destroying their personal imagination and their personal knowingness. The whole of society steps out from the day you were born to destroy the very knowingness that you've got within you. And those of us who are weak, and most of us are, succumb and succumb and succumb until we're so tractable that society can do anything it likes with us at any time. And society is usually my neighbor. You know, people blame the government. Government is just made of people. Government is not, you know, a piece of stone or something like this. Government is made of people. Now, what is this knowingness in an individual? How does it operate? Let us look how it operates. It is usually expressed through some moral code which has grown to maturity and valid functioning. Unfortunately, and all too often, the code is enthroned and perpetuated long after it serves a valid or any valid purpose whatever. And a great many of the psychological problems with which we are faced today spring from this cause. The persons so afflicted have usually not been able to adjust to the existing codes and at one and the same time follow their own natural instinct for good. This is particularly noticeable in persons who have to engage in the field of commerce. In cases where the person's livelihood is in the hands of those who have themselves fallen low on the scale of awareness and conscience, and of frequently have psychological and spiritual problems. And in this particular case, when such people have power, they activate the psychological problems that arise from these in others. Insanity is not biologically an inherent disease. It's contagious, yes, very contagious, highly contagious. But insanity is not a contagious disease. It is not passed through the bloodstream, and medicine will never find the cure of it, because they don't know what they're looking for. It is passed on a mental level from one person to another. And this is just how it happens. As I say, let me repeat that. In cases where the person's livelihood is in the hands of those who have themselves fallen low on the scale of conscience, the psychological and spiritual problem is chronically activated. All too often, I'm sorry to say, conscience, I beg your pardon, is lulled with the sedative of, I quote, "I must act in this way if I and my family are to survive at all." And so all forms of behavior of the most diabolical form are excused under this banner. My wife and my children will starve. And therefore people will sell goods with their tongue in their cheek. They will perform acts on behalf of society and charge them for them which they know in their heart and soul are totally and utterly dishonest, and in this process help to destroy themselves. Now, many who are unable to accept the conflict of personal ethics and business morals find themselves in serious and mental and physical difficulties, and this, by the way, is usually known as a nervous breakdown due to overwork. We have lovely cliches in our society for taking care of these major problems. This is the short road, in my opinion, to spiritual ruin and total oblivion. I will refer to this again in another point. Another aspect of this problem of ethics and morals is that it's far too often a reference or a reliance on a moral code is nothing more than the rejection of personal responsibility. Frequently, people will blame conditions and blame governments and blame rules and will blame regulations for behaving in a manner which they know in their heart and soul, as we use the cliche, that it is wrong to do so. For them personally, not for everybody, but for them personally. But they will say, I have got to do it because it's the law of the land, the law of the city, the this, the that, or the other. This is a personal denial of responsibility. And every time you deny your own personal responsibility in society, you degrade and you decompose that which is you. You are guaranteeing your own damnation or your own destruction as an individual being. Now, the maintenance of a code under these circumstances, when applied, when expressed on an individual level, invariably, and I make no apologies for this, invariably descends into bigotry. And when expressed on a collective level, descends into tyranny. This is the explanation of situations like we had in Germany in the 30s, and in which we had to fight a major world war. Bigotry. No establishment, be it state or otherwise, that remains inflexible or immutable can expect to escape the penalty of degeneration and decay. And bear in mind, no establishment, no state is made up of anything other than human beings, people, us, each and every one of us. Change is the essence of vitality and the dynamic of creative ability. Change is essential. Becoming is the key word, if you like, in this particular aspect. Becoming is the key word. I said earlier that we must, to be honest, examine the world in which we live today, and that I appear to go away from it. But let us look at this world in which we live, so that we can see what we can do about it, as far as we ourselves individually are concerned. Now, we've only to look at this world to recognize the great magnitude of unrest and upheaval that besets mankind as a whole. We are surrounded on every side with a great magnitude of scientific, industrial, and sociological progress. Medicine is making enormous strides in its fight against disease. And also, quote, psychology, unquote. Unfortunately, it has also taken unto itself the problems beset the human mind. This is what psychology has done, for which medicine is totally ill-equipped. Productivity is increasingly rising, or continually rising, I beg your pardon, with the consequence that the working day for the vast majority of us is shorter now than at any time since the Industrial Revolution. The extent and multiplicity of organized entertainment is staggering in its variety and frightening in its quality. Education, technical, vocational, and cultural, is available to millions today, or certainly hundreds of thousands today, who would not even have been acquainted with the words themselves a short generation ago. This looks very good at first glance. But at one and the same time, there is taking place an intermingling of people of all sorts who've been drawn from the most diverse backgrounds. This is a natural concomitant of social integration and social development, and something that we've got to face. But just imagine the great, and I repeat, the great area of interpersonal relationships that is produced by this enormous change in the pattern of living on so vast a concourse of people. Think of the adjustment and the changes that are necessary. With the quickening tempo and coagulant pattern of civilization, the time allotted to adjustment is shrinking rapidly. This has a very important consequences. In those places where life remains on a pedestrian level, it appears calm, collected, and even purposeful in many places. In fact, happy in a few places. Contrast this with what we may observe in urbanized living in the metropolitan areas. The faces of urbanized humanity portray irritation, tension, and as often as not sullenness. The mouth is drawn tight, the shoulders are hunched with their own problems and the problems of the world. For such people, it would seem to be a world without purpose, without meaning, other than eating and procreating. I might add at this point, for them, procreating for what? Now, a compulsive seeking of pleasure and escapism, this would appear to be our society as of today. Not just the United States. Not just the United States, unfortunately. This is the society of the world today. Now, to an ever-increasing extent, the amount of time spent outside of sleeping is seldom utilized for creative activity. And when it is, when leisure time is used, otherwise it is usually used at the dictates of movie magnates and television barons and tycoons. This is a pretty sad thing to look at. But it's not nearly so dark as it may be, but let us turn now to something else. Yet there is a paradox in all this progress. Notwithstanding these advances, the bulk of humanity cannot live in harmony one with another. Within the lifetime of most of us, there have been two major devastating wars, one world slump, and a chain of smaller wars interspersed with a series of international crises, political, economic, and military. Notwithstanding the periodic international conferences, we still are in this state of tension, and the state of tension grows more every day. Now, at this point, I want to move to something which I think is very important. At least it is probably one of the most important things to me. And it's simply this. For several centuries now, the creed that has produced this state is a creed which I refer to as the scientific creed, in which man and our species is looked upon as an accident of molecular action. A pure accident of molecular action. And this has reigned supreme. Is it any wonder that man has now reached the stage of being in agreement with the belief and then behaving accordingly? If he is a molecular accident, why should he be responsible? Why should he be expected to observe laws he had no part in making? Why should he feel he owes a debt to a society which he never planned on entering in the first place, if this theory is correct? This is the logic of the molecular accident theory. This has been an era of rampant materialism. Man as an entity has been looked upon as a byproduct of nature. His thoughts, emotions, actions have been considered to be mere accidents of environmental stimuli generated within him by an unknown, unidentified, and coincidental accident. This is how it's been looked upon. An accident and an action over which he has no control whatever. Can we honestly show any surprise then when we find that successive generations of man have sunk to the level of apathy so far as our environment is concerned, or his environment is concerned? You know, for most people, I was talking to a lady over dinner tonight at Mrs. Bruger's home. I made this comment, and I'd like to make it again here. You try how many people you meet in the course of your daily life can be aware of the tip of their own toe. Ask them, are they aware of the tip of their own left or right big toe? And they probably might even lift their foot up to see if it's there. That's about as much awareness as this world is sunken to. Some of us are a little more fortunate, we are aware of other things. Now, let us look at this from another point of view. The progress of man that we have talked about so far in advances of medicine and so forth has been marked by various advances which have usually been noted, historically at least, by the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of kings, emperors, dictators, etc. But in my opinion, it would have been a lot better if the milestones of man's progress had been marked by the birth of ideas that led to greater senses of awareness, and to see that the worthwhile ideas that have furthered the advance and optimum survival, because these, in the final analysis, are what leads to salvation for each and every one of us, individually and collectively. I refer to this molecular theory because this is very important, because this is really what I'm here to talk about tonight, because this is really what is me. I want to go into it a little more because if one understands this, I believe, one has got an answer to many, many things. What exactly do we mean by a molecular theory? Until the time of Copernicus and the development of the telescope by Galileo, astronomers believed the world to be flat, so did most other people as well. And at one and the same time, it was believed to be the center of the universe. Let us not forget this. This is very important. The Greeks admittedly had gained a philosophical, speculative theory of a spherical world, or a spherical universe, but they did not have the benefit and the aid of the mathematical lens, which was brought into being by Galileo. Now, before and up to this time, as a matter of fact, the only people who had any sincere or real knowledge of the spherical aspect of our world were the Indian philosophers of the great Indus Valley. I'm sure many of you are acquainted with much of the Indian writings of the Vedanta and this sort of thing, so I don't want to go into them specifically. But as far as European thought was concerned, the place of which we are so proud, you know, this is our heritage. I was even born there. It's my heritage too, you know. I was born there, very important. I got to be loyal to it. As far as European thought was concerned, it assigned the birth of the world to a date no earlier than 4000 BC. A work known as the Universal History, which was published in London in 1779, was the definitive authority for the acceptance of this interpretation. But in the 18th century, or perhaps even earlier in the 17th, embryonic geology and paleontology began to reveal an earlier and an obviously older world, an older Earth. This has got very great importance for us to recognize this fact. The discovery of the enormous thicknesses of the stratified rock and its implications, together with the fossilized remains closely allied to man, engendered and sustained these and further speculations. The meld of the newborn astronomy, geology, and paleontology compelled an unwitting and almost unwilling world to recognize that the planet Earth, the one we occupy, was a mere speck in a vast universe of limitless space. It was learned that throughout this space are what are known as fixed stars. Our sun, which warms us and gives us light to our Earth, is one of these so-called fixed stars. This is what astronomy teaches. But with the advance of measurement and calibration, we have learned that even the fixed stars are not fixed anymore. Because of their distance from us, a movement of millions of miles to galactic space is so minute that it is almost imperceptible except by the measurement of its light density. As a matter of fact, early Egyptian stellar maps, when compared with modern maps of today, stellar maps of today as taken by our spaceships and so forth, clearly delineate the fact that the so-called fixed stars are quite away from where they were originally believed to be. I hope you are beginning to follow me now where our molecular theory is beginning to get us. We begin to see how strong and how firm it is. Now, let me give you an example of what I'm trying to hit here. To quote one example alone, the sun's diameter is estimated to be over 160,000 miles. 860,000 miles, with a bulk of 1.25 times that of the Earth. Bulk. This means that if the Earth were an inch in diameter, the sun would be 9 feet. This gives us some idea of the vastness of this universe that we are trying to tie down into a molecular theory. Now, the classical theory is that vast ages ago, the sun, which was spinning at immeasurable speeds, cast off some of its hot molten mass, and in the process of cooling, that these became the Earth and the various other planets. I don't quarrel with this theory. This is fine. This is all right. This is as far as we go. And in addition to this, it is suggested that our atmosphere was formed by the cooling gases from these particular portions of the sun. Now, as these rocks cooled, and here we hit the very basis of the molecular theory. As the rocks cooled, they began, or as this mass of molten material cooled, it began to form itself into various forms of rocks. And it is claimed that there was no life forever apparent in these rocks. And it is not until we get to the Paleolithic level of rock that there is any life form to be found. And then we are told, and it is generally accepted, that the life form shown in terms of fossils is one without spine, that is without vertebrae, or without shell. This is fine, we can accept this. I'll still go along with the scientists on this one. And then we come on up the scale to the various levels until somewhere along the line there stands up man himself, the biped, he suddenly stands up on his 2 feet. Now, what does this suggest to us? What does this mean for us? I would like to move from this purely material outlook on the growth and development of our nation, our countries, our planet, our universe, to something slightly different. I'd like to move from the purely material evidence of life to the immaterial, or the metaphysical. For generations, there has been an abiding quarrel between the materialists on the one hand and the spiritualists on the other. I use the spiritualists not in the narrow sense, but in the broadest possible sense. As at this time, there appears to be very little compromise. The materialists talk about objects as though they consisted entirely of external action in transitory relationships, whereas the spiritualists think and speak in terms of solitary introspection, that is, totally looking in on oneself all the time, and objects are viewed as shut in upon themselves in a kind of immanence. This I refer to as the without and the within school. The within school is the one who is totally spiritualist, and the without school is the one who is totally materialist. And now I'm going to make a postulation, because here I am moving very much into the realm of speculative thought. I believe that both protagonists are looking at the same coin from opposing sides. They are looking at the same coin from opposing sides. These are points of view and viewpoints, if you care to put it in that language, and I will refer to these at a little later time. I would like to draw attention to the divinity and the humanity of God in this particular aspect. The material and the spiritual, the divinity and the humanity, the good and the bad, the black and the white, the good and the evil. Only if we can look upon and examine the phenomenon and entity of God in terms of incarnation and divinity being one and the same, can we possibly understand the within and the without of society in which we live. There is no separation. There is no separation, and the teaching and the process of the teaching of the doctrine of materialism is the one sure way for the believers of this doctrine to destroy themselves and bring themselves to total oblivion. They are one and the same thing. Now, the divisions which we have referred to above, the withins and the withouts, are the prime points of contention that mark all of the upheavals that beset this world of ours. And they are also the same contentions that upset the world of the Middle Ages. I referred earlier to the telescope and its impact on the theological, philosophical, and sociological precepts of the 14th and 16th centuries. This is exactly what I was referring to at this point. This was the basic thing that caused the upheaval. It was the Middle Ages, bear in mind, that gave birth to science that was in due course to take onto itself, I beg your pardon, the cloak of omnipotence and the totality of explanation of all things, including man. In this way, man became an end product of the purely molecular activity, devoid of purpose or goal. This is how we reach this dastardly position. This is the price we have to pay for the supremacy and the enthronement of science. Science is the biblical tree of knowledge, as far as I'm concerned, of which we have eaten and sickened. Bear in mind what I said earlier. If you didn't know it already, you wouldn't know it when you saw it. Because of this phenomenon, the phenomenon of conscience, or consciousness, has been restricted exclusively to the higher life forms, that is, man, and as such has been treated as an aberrant, or aberration, if you like, and an epiphenomenon. This is how science has treated it. If it could not be measured, and it could not be weighed, you didn't have to give it attention. And like the ostrich that buries its head in the sand, they hoped it would go away. And the trouble is, it just won't lie down. It keeps popping up again and again. The arrival of this stage between science and religion, if you care to put it, made the schism between these two groups totally complete. Totally complete. Now, the fundamental character of the universe in which we live is atomic. That is nuclear. In all its known and apparent phases, or its visible phases if you prefer. Now, here I'm going to ask you to be very patient with me, because we are now getting into the realm of where my thinking is almost brand new. I haven't even managed to test it against experiences yet. But this is what I'm hoping to gain from you people tonight. I mean this sincerely. The scaling down of matter is unlimited. So much so that when we examine the minuscule, the tiniest that you can possibly examine, by the laws of diminishing and disintegrating mass, we find that the particles of same, in their turn, are granulated all the way down to the imperceivably small. Yet throughout this process of observation, the pattern of repetitive unity is constant and diversely complete. What I'm saying is this: you will never see everything happening all the time in all places at once. And yet, there is a repeated pattern in everything you can observe in life, from the snowflake that falls to the clouds that pass in the sky above us. The pattern is repeated again and again. Now, this is very important. This is very important. It's a fact that's been overlooked in observation. It's very, very important. This means, as I say, that everything in the universe does not happen all the time and continuously at every place at the same time, but it does happen. Each particle, however small, has an identity of mass and behavior. Each particle of matter, no matter what it is, has an identity of mass and behavior. And furthermore, the calibration within each particle, or within each unit, if you like, and within the groups, is both monotonous, right down, monotonous, that is repetitive in the repetitive sense, right down to the threshold of observation and recognition. As far down as we can perceive even with our own awareness or with instruments, this pattern continues. This means that our observations, that is, our sensory observations, themselves exist in a floating sea of indefinability. Our very observations made with our sensory organs are actually resting in a complete sea of indefinability. However deep we penetrate, even to the apparently irreducible, we find none other than fundamental unity in every particle every time. No matter how far we descend the ladder of finite matter, we discover an ever-continuing dependency and an ever-diminishing individuation. And this is important. This is the kernel of the whole thing. Whatever space a particle occupies, any particle, the most minuscule or smallest part of matter that is possible to conceive, whatever space a particle occupies, it can only be defined by its influence on all the other particles around it, and they in their turn by it. Now, this is none other than what I refer to as the law of coextensiveness with every other particle throughout the universe. In plain words, there's something that holds them together, that operates and directs them. And the transmissions which take between these minute parts is something else that's not material. Because it is something, if you get down and go down and go down and go down, and you still haven't got to that which began it all, there must be something else. There must be something else. Now this is what I call, or this is what I refer to, as the areas or centers of activity and direction. And I, for the purpose of discussion here tonight, I call this energy, because that's what the scientists call it, but they can't define it. They don't know what it is. They can measure its manifestations. Here we are, right here. What is electricity? Oh yeah, you can have cookers and vacuum cleaners and irons and all sorts of things, and the generators on cars. But what is it? These are just its manifestations. What is energy? Has scientists defined what energy is for us? No, they have not. This is the term that science uses. It expresses in other words, it's the term that science used to express the generative and activating agent of action within and between atoms, no more than that. And as of this time, science, as I say, has found no definitive analysis of what is known as energy. This energy applies whether we talk of electrons, neutrons, positrons, photons, or whatever. Science, and physics in particular, only recognizes an evolution of matter by a process of building up, by a complication and a conjugation of recognizable elements. That is all. That is all it does. No more. And all of this is acceptable and explainable only if we accept the idea of duration. You must accept the idea of duration if this is to be explained and acceptable. Now then, let us here and now just try out what I would refer to as a little experiment on a conceptual level. Let us reverse the telescope. Let us turn it around instead of looking outwards into the far distant parts. Let us turn it around to a study of the infinitely small. If we do this with the molecular theory, and what we've just been talking, and the building up and the evolution of matter theory, if we do this, we would be compelled to accept the belief that the ultimate stability and unity of the universe could only be found at the bottom of a line of decomposition and disintegration. In fact, it would be held together at the bottom by nothing. This is carrying the scientific theory of molecular accident or molecular activity to its logical conclusion, and I have yet to meet a scientist who is prepared to debate it with me. They will not debate this. This is the logic of the theory. Now, personally, I reject this theory as an intellectual absurdity and by the same token, a spiritual blasphemy. To recapitulate what we've just said, following the theories of molecular accident science, at the bottom is an unresolved simplicity or nothingness, undefinable mathematically. You cannot define it mathematically. You cannot define nothingness mathematically. What we find, and where science starts, is with a swarming of elementary particles, positive and negative, or a series of simple bodies. They can't go below this. They refuse to go below it. They say, well, and they'll leave it at that. A series of simple bodies somewhere between hydrogen and uranium. Now, this compound of bodies, according to them, with their increasing molecular weight up to a critical stage, and suddenly man appears. Bingo, there he is. Bingo, there he is. And all they're really referring to at this stage is the law of complexification, which is not very interesting anyway. Now, this indicates quite clearly to me that however far we regress, I want to repeat this very carefully and very slowly, it would appear to me that however far we regress, we find matter revealing itself to us in a constant state of genesis. Now, I believe this state of genesis to be the act of becoming. I believe that these two, becoming and genesis, be the agent, I beg your pardon. I believe these two to be also that which we call spirit, that which we call soul, that which we call thought, that which we call I. It is the same thing. It is one and the same thing under many different names. The act of becoming, the genesis that operates the entire universe, is I. It is the same force. It is nothing other than the same force. What I'm saying here, in other words, genesis, becoming, and what science calls energy, they are all one and the same. The reason that they can never define it and never will be able to define it, because they have closed off their mind already about ever being able to define it. You don't have to go around looking for it. It's right there in front of you every day. You walk down the street. It's right there. But if you decide that it's not there, and that it's merely an aberration, and that if you don't look at it, that maybe it'll go away, you've got a very poor chance of defining it. Now then, this brings us to a very important question. What then is man? What are we? What is God, if this is one and the same thing? First, let us attempt to define man as we understand them. Man is an amalgam of the psychological, the biological, plus thought, or spirit. We can use many terms, it doesn't matter what we use. But man, as science sees him, is an animal, and he's included in the same category or family as the hominidae. By refusing to recognize the change or leap made by man that separates him from his forebears, science completely neglects an entire dimension in the universe. Because believe me, there was a leap. It is in fact, I hope that people will not disagree too violently if I say this, the dimension which they have missed, or which they're refusing to recognize, is in fact the fourth dimension that they've been spending thousands of years looking for. And the fourth dimension is the leap. This is the leap. It is nothing other than that. This is my contention. By the way, I say this, and I hope that I hope this provokes a lot of discussion, this point. But I don't say this in any, believe me, in any conceit. I hope to be helped in the furtherance of this idea. This is the first time I have mentioned this idea to any group at any time, at any place. I'll repeat that because I believe it's very important. By refusing to recognize the change or the leap made by man that separates him from his forebears, science completely neglects an entire dimension in the universe. And I believe that this dimension is none other than the so-called fourth dimension which science has been looking for. It has been with us for several hundred generations without being recognized for what it is. Now I'm going to be very brave, and I'm going to stick my neck out, as this colloquial terms today, because I'm going to try and define it. The hominization of man, that is, in other words, the change from the beast, if you like, the ordinary animal of the field, the other bipeds. The hominization of man was achieved by the achievement and rise to power by the phenomenon of reflection. And reflection, by definition, is the power to turn in upon oneself and to take possession of oneself It is the power to objectivize the subjective and to subjectivize the objective. Man and man alone has the power to choose his point of view and viewpoint. Let me illustrate this very simply. If we were to draw a circle on this wall, a complete circle, and put a dot in the middle of the circle, irrespective of the size, man is the only creature who has the power within himself to stand at the center of the circle and view all 360 degrees. He is also the only creature who can stand at any one of these 360 degrees and view the center and the other 364, or 359, big brother. This is the fourth dimension. This is the fourth dimension. This is it. I believe this most firmly. I would very much welcome anybody's ideas on this, and I will hope that somebody will go into it and investigate it further possibly than I have done. Now, have we any way of proving this? You know, although I'm not a scientist, I try and play to a certain degree by their rules, provided the rules don't inhibit my speculations. Reflection, as I say, is the power to know oneself. Not merely to know, but to know that you know. Is there anybody here in this room this evening would say to me, I don't know that I know? All people will tell you, yes, well, yeah, animals know, sure, they know where their feeding bowl is. But they don't know that they know. Because if they had this quality to know that they knew, why haven't they developed in many thousands of years, many millions of years? Why haven't they developed? They haven't. The elephant has still got two tails. One of them is not very useful to him anyway. By the way, this power of reflection is also something else which science talks about in another way. They talk about the missing link. Good luck to them, they'll never find it. There's no missing link. There is no missing link. They're looking for something miraculous to suddenly show up, you know, like the Piltdown man that they managed to dig up back in England. Look at how they grabbed at this. Anything rather than look at the truth. Anything rather than look at the truth. Now, as I said, for science, consciousness has been treated in an ostrich-like manner. If I bury my head, perhaps it will go away. It is perhaps, and it is definitely so, I should say, it is from this point in man's development that flows the great effervescence of beauty and inclination. It is from this we have abstraction, we have logic, we have reason, we have choice, we have invention, we have mathematics, we have art, we have speculation, and we have ideas of dreams and loves and the benefits of all the activities of an inner life. All of these, each and every one of them, are an integral part of man. If exploited and developed to their utmost, they can be the launchpad to the state of Homo novus.